Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Tuesday. Happy first day of April. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. A sales tax in Fresno is helping fund artistic and cultural projects across the city.
Measure P really has an opportunity to transform the cultural scene in Fresno by providing consistent funding.
Coming up, we will learn about how you could apply for some of those funds. But first, these headlines. Evacuations have been ordered near a new wildfire in the eastern Sierra. The Silver Fire ignited Sunday near the city of Bishop. It's already scorched more than 1,500 acres. The blaze has prompted evacuations of about 800 homes and has closed part of Route 6. As of Tuesday morning, it was 47% contained. Almost 60 years ago, Cesar Chavez ended a 25-day fast at Memorial Park in Delano. He was protesting the treatment of farm workers across California. Yesterday, on Cesar Chavez Day, thousands marched from that same park. They told KVPR's Joshua Yeager they're continuing in the legendary labor leader's footsteps.
Thousands of demonstrators are swinging flags and holding signs. Some read, "With these hands, we feed you." Others bear the Iron Eagle mascot of the United Farm Workers. Chavez co-founded the union in 1962. Teresa Romero now leads it.
You know, we're here to do two things. One, to honor Cesar Chavez and his legacy. But number two is to honor and recognize the workers, the immigrant workers that contribute so much to our economy.
Alejandro Martinez is one of those workers. His farm near Merced recently won a contract with the UFW that now includes paid holidays and vacation.
Es muy emocionante.
He says it's very exciting, and they want everyone to see, yes, we can. But he adds the threat of deportation is sowing fear across the San Joaquin Valley. That's something State Attorney General Rob Bonta vowed to keep fighting as he addressed the sea of marchers. For KVPR News, I'm Joshua Yeager in Delano.
The city of Fresno has begun tearing down a building that had once been a Chinatown landmark. The Bao On Tong building dated back to 1920, according to Chinatown historical records. It had historically been a social club, but was ravaged by a fire in 2022. Demolition began on Monday. The city now owns the property, and officials plan to convert it into affordable housing. The ancestral Chukchansi language will continue to be offered at some foothill schools. Yosemite Unified School District has extended a contract with the Picayune Rancheria of Chukchansi Indians. The contract allows students to take up to 4 years of Chukchansi language classes. They're offered at Coarsegold Elementary and Yosemite High School. The program is funded by the Tribal Council. Fresno Unified is trying out a new solution to chronic absenteeism. Last week, the school board voted to subsidize rent for 10 families with unstable housing. The Fresno Bee reports it's the region's first known school district to help pay for students' housing. The program cost $156,000 and will put up 10 families at an affordable housing complex on Blackstone Avenue. It'll also provide wraparound services like career development and financial skills.
Spring cleaning is around the corner. What a hassle. Let KVPR help by getting that unwanted vehicle out of the way. We'll tow it away free of charge and we'll send you a receipt for your taxes. The best part, the proceeds will benefit all the public radio programs you love. Oh, and we can take RVs, boats, and motorcycles too. Find out more at kvpr.org/cars or call 855-277-2346.
And now to our main story. Applications are now open for the second round of Fresno's Measure P arts funding. The measure, in part, awards grants to local artists and organizations, but it's been mired in issues since its inception. When voters first passed the measure in 2018, officials disagreed over whether the measure actually got enough votes to pass, resulting in a lawsuit that delayed the measure. Years later, once funds were finally administered, it was unclear who exactly was on the committee doling out those taxpayer dollars. Doug Hoagland with the local arts outlet, the Monroe Review, had to file a public records request to get that information. Doug is a 30-year veteran of the Fresno Bee who now works as an independent journalist. He's followed the Measure P saga closely, and he joined us in the KVPR studios to discuss what's next as artists and organizations prepare once again to make their case for funding this year. He starts us off by explaining the goal of Measure P.
Well, in 2018, Fresno voters, by a percentage of 52%, approved Measure P, which is a 30-year increase to the sales tax for people who live in the city of Fresno. It will raise millions of dollars over that 30-year period. 88% of the money is dedicated to increasing and expanding parks in Fresno. 12% of the money goes to the arts community. And that is the part of the initiative that I've been covering.
And has been quite controversial in recent years, and we'll get into that.
Sure.
But as you mentioned, included in this tax measure is funding for the arts, for projects that uplift the community, highlight diversity. It seems a bit unusual to group arts funding in with city parks. How do the arts fit into Measure P?
Well, here's where I'm going to tell you that I'm not entirely sure, but the best thing I can say is that there had been a great need for parks in Fresno when you compare Fresno to other cities we're woefully lacking in park facilities. And at the same time, there has not been a consistent funding stream for public art projects in the city. So I think it was a melding of the two needs together into Measure P in 2018.
And what kinds of arts projects were supported in the first round of Measure P grants, which was last year, I believe, right?
Yes. Maybe just a little bit of background. Even though the initiative was approved in 2018, there were court battles about whether it needed a greater percentage to pass. Ultimately, the courts ruled in favor of the passage, but there was a several-year lag for the Measure P funds to actually begin flowing out to agencies and to organizations. So in 2014, there was $9.4 million awarded because—
In 2024.
I'm sorry, forgive me. Yes, 2024. Because that money had been accruing in the account for several years. Having given that background, there were 137 applications in 2024. 112 recipients were given grants. Now, those grants ranged, for instance, the Fresno Philharmonic Orchestra received both an operational grant to fund its day-to-day operations, but also received a project grant to have a work composed that would highlight Mas Masamoto's recent book. And then there were smaller projects. In Southeast Fresno, there was a project for woodworking, where somebody works with young people on the discipline and the artistry of woodworking. So there was a great range in the types of projects that Measure P in 2024 funded.
And for the sake of transparency, the outlet you write for, the Monroe Review, was awarded a grant as well, right?
Yes. Donald Monroe, who's the publisher of the Monroe Review, he's the former arts writer at the Fresno Bee. He is currently a professor at Fresno State in the Mass Communications Department. Yes, he did apply for a grant and did receive one.
Do we know how much it was for?
I believe it was $26,000.
Now, last year's grant awarding process was riddled with issues, as we've indicated, so much so that the Monroe Review actually submitted public records requests for the names of applicants and for the names of the people on the review committee. Can you explain, sort of at a high level, what happened last year?
Well, I think the basis for this, and it's always important to remember, this is tax money that is paid by the citizens of Fresno. And because it is public money, the public has a right to know as much about that process and about how the money is being allocated as is possible. So to that end, we filed a Public Records Act request for the names of the applicants and the names of the people on the review panels. Now, the review panels are composed of artists, cultural bearers, nonprofit arts administrators who would review the applications, score them. Those scores would be the basis for recommending the grants. And it just seemed logical in the spirit of transparency, and again, because it was public money, that the public should know who those people are. And initially, there was resistance to disclosing those names. It went to the city attorney's office. We, of course, had the right to that information and ultimately received it.
Wow. And can you detail a little more what that application process is like?
Yes. So the significant change this year is that anyone, and that is either an individual artist or a nonprofit arts organization that wants to apply for a Measure P grant, has to file a letter of intent, which is really an online form that provides information about the potential applicant. That form, that letter of intent, must be filed by 11:59 p.m. Friday, April 4th. If the Arts Council reviews your letter of intent and gives it basically a passing grade, you then have access to apply for the grant. But if you miss that deadline, or if your letter of intent is not complete and you don't have time to correct it, you're basically out of luck in applying for grants this year.
And it's worth noting the difference in funding available. As you mentioned, it was about $9 million in 2024. Now, this year, it's just $6.2 million.
That's what they're estimating. You know, last year, the figure that was available changed slightly over the process. But yes, the starting point seems to be $6.2 million, which, depending on the number of applicants, would indicate that there could be greater competition for a smaller pot of money.
Anything else you'd like to add, Doug?
Well, I think maybe it's just important to keep the balance between process and what the ultimate goal of Measure P is. For many years, arts institutions in Fresno had no dedicated public funding stream. And Measure P, because it's 30 years long, really has an opportunity to transform the cultural scene in Fresno by providing consistent funding to both established organizations and emerging artists and organizations.
Doug Hoagland, independent journalist who's been covering Measure P for the Monroe Review. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be here.
And that does it for today's show. If you have an art story in your community you think is worth spotlighting, let us know. Email podcast@kvpr.org. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.